New details have emerged about the meeting between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky yesterday at the White House, and if all of them are implemented, Ukraine could actually come out of the war in a winning position. The United States Senate, as I mentioned in the previous episode, has nevertheless held a procedural vote on the bill for new sanctions against Russia and Iran. The significance of the moment is that the vote took place on the day of Senator Lindsey Graham's funeral. The co-author of this document, and immediately after a closed meeting of the senators with the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, who arrived in the US the previous day. On the same day, Zelensky made a series of statements about the situation on the front lines in interviews with American publications, about Russia's plans and the request for urgent deliveries of Patriot interceptor missiles to Ukraine. Trump promises to provide a package of weapons so that Ukraine can defend itself in the winter, and also changes the overall strategy of supporting Ukraine. In general, let's go over the new details of Zelensky's visit to Washington in this episode and what he was promised at the White House. My name is Alexei Pechi, let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. We are moving towards the mark of 300,000 subscribers, so I would be grateful for each of your subscriptions. So, as you know, yesterday Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky held a face-to-face meeting, their second in a month, after which Zelensky met with senators. Here, just to stay on topic, I'll note right away, I noticed how Russians started writing that, look, Zelensky was led into the White House through the back door because supposedly that's the attitude towards Zelensky in the White House. I just want to say right away, your cuddly little embarrassment. Vladimir Putin won't even be let into Washington, let alone the White House. This piece of shit isn't allowed in the civilized world. Even Trump doesn't talk to him on the phone, although he was supposedly planning to talk to him back on July 8th. So you should keep your mouth shut a little bit like this. I'll repeat it again, when a Russian goes online to American YouTube, he should wash his face, comb his hair, realize that he's no longer in his own herd. He has entered the civilized world and should behave accordingly. Not like your foreign minister Sergei Lavrov, no, not like that. You need to behave appropriately, otherwise you're just trash. And what do people do with trash? They throw it away. Let's continue. Let's start with the sanctions bill, since it's the most concrete result of the day. The document, which the late Republican Senator Lindsey Graham had been working on for more than 2 years, has been publicly referred to as the sanctions from hell. This term was introduced by Lindsey Graham himself. This law gives the US president the right to impose targeted import tariffs against countries that purchase significant volumes of Russian oil and gas or help the Kremlin circumvent energy sanctions. Moreover, Trump can impose tariffs of up to 100%, including against the 5 largest importers of Russian oil, including India and China. The document also gives Trump the authority to lift these tariffs at his own discretion. Although there's a nuance regarding China, Trump may not impose tariffs against it at all, as they say, to avoid conflict, even if China is helping the Russians. It's important to note here that the vote in the Senate on July 29 was procedural. That is, it paves the way for the bill to be discussed on the Senate floor and for all written amendments to be considered. That means the document still has to go through a final vote. It will then go to the House of Representatives and be signed by the president. Trump previously stated that he would support this initiative, but only after insisting on the inclusion of additional sanctions against Iran, which was done. There is a strong chance the law will finally pass. And here is the symbolism of the moment, as Zelensky said, quote, is that it is precisely today, on the very day we said goodbye to Senator Lindsey Graham, a procedural vote was held in the Senate on the bill for sanctions against Russia, which he had spent so much time working on. It was an honor to be present during the vote count. 86 senators supported the document. This is the first step toward implementing Lindsey Graham's plans, and definitely a step toward peace. So, the senators invited Zelensky to observe part of the voting from the Senate gallery, after which he applauded and said thank you, and then the senators applauded him in return. In general, this was intended as a demonstrative display, But there was also another important outcome of Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to the United States. He is now, by the way, already in Poland. And after meeting with Trump, Zelensky gave interviews to Axios and Fox News in which he revealed the details. Let's start with an assessment of the situation at the front. According to Zelensky, right now the initiative is definitely not in Vladimir Putin's hands. He explained this by pointing to the Russian army's losses, quote, "Right now Putin is losing 30,000 soldiers every month. Those are heavy losses, but he doesn't want to stop this war. That's why the initiative is not in Putin's hands right now." At the same time, Zelensky emphasized that despite losing the initiative, Putin refuses to agree to a ceasefire. In an interview with Axios, Zelensky gave a more detailed analysis of the Russian side's intentions. According to him, Vladimir Putin is moving toward further escalation. He might even try to provoke other countries in the region in order to achieve an easier victory that he can sell to his unwashed savage audience. Like, well, if things aren't working out in Ukraine, why not seize a piece of a neighboring country, maybe even a NATO country, quickly present it as a victory, fire up those unwashed Russians for war, and then you can pull back, kind of crawl back and say, oh, there was a little mistake. The main thing is just to make Russian society bloodthirsty and ready for war again. Zelensky said that Russia is still receiving weapons from Iran and is building infrastructure to receive 30,000 additional military personnel from North Korea, who will then be sent to fight in Ukraine. He also claimed that North Korea is supplying Russia with ballistic missiles and other weapons. Separately, Zelensky stated that Vladimir Putin is taking subtle steps to prepare for the possible mobilization of another 500,000 servicemen. As for the negotiation process, the picture described by Zelensky is rather ambiguous. According to him, Donald Trump's envoys, Jared Kushner and Stephen Witkoff, are still in contact with Russian and Ukrainian negotiators. But most of the time they are still focused on Iran. One of the outcomes of the meeting with Trump was the likely visit of Kushner and Witkoff to Kyiv within the next 2 weeks. This will be their first trip to Ukraine after several visits to Russia. And now Zelensky said that he wants to discuss in detail with them ideas for resuming peace talks and wants them to see the situation in Ukraine personally with their own eyes. Like, it's cool, of course, as J.D. Vance said, I see what's happening in Ukraine through stories and reels on Instagram, but it's best to see it with your own eyes. How Russian missiles are destroying hospitals, schools, destroy residential buildings, kill children in Ukraine, kill civilians, destroy power plants, strike at stores, at food warehouses, and so on. You need to see this with your own eyes to understand what kind of savage beasts Ukrainians are dealing with. According to Zelensky, Kushner and Witkoff, especially Kushner, are still pushing for a ceasefire to create space for diplomacy. But Zelensky himself is skeptical. He doesn't believe that Vladimir Putin will agree to a pause in the fighting. Despite this skepticism and the current dynamics on the battlefield, Zelensky stated that he is interested in resuming peace talks with Russia. When asked about progress in negotiations to end the war, Zelensky gave a reserved answer, the essence of which is that it is too early to talk about real progress, since the main focus of the US administration is on Iran. And here is the central practical question of Zelensky's visit to the US. It's the supply of interceptor missiles for the Patriot air defense systems. As Zelensky himself stated, he asked Trump to urgently provide Ukraine with the so-called winter missile package for the Patriot to repel Russian attacks on energy facilities. According to him, by winter, Ukraine expects to receive 300 ballistic missile interceptors. Zelensky also stated that during the meeting on Tuesday, Trump agreed to speed up the issuance of licenses for the production of interceptor missiles for Patriot systems. But he clarified that even if a license is obtained to set up the production of a large number of interceptors, it will take from 1 to 5 years. According to Zelensky, such timeframes are unacceptable because, as he put it, Ukraine needed anti-ballistic missiles yesterday. He noted that Trump promised to try to help, but made it clear that it would be difficult because the US itself needs these interceptors due to the war with Iran. Well, after his visit to the White House, Zelensky also said that he personally met with representatives from the United States, from the American defense companies Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, which produce those very interceptor missiles. But there have already been information leaks that the companies themselves are reluctant to transfer the technology. For now, they're trying to play it safe, get some guarantees from Trump, and so on. But the context of this request from Zelensky to Trump is very important. For example, according to the Ukrainian Air Force, during the large-scale attack on the night of July 6, unfortunately, the air defense forces were not able to intercept a single ballistic missile, specifically due to a shortage of Patriot ammunition. In other words, the Ukrainian air defense forces were forced to just watch as Russian missiles attacked Ukraine. By the way, a separate story was brought up here. This is about Ukraine's relationship with Israel in the context of the Iranian issue, although there is no direct information that details of what was discussed with Trump on this issue are not available in open sources. But online, we discussed this yesterday. It's available on my Telegram channel. There's already a video circulating, where Zelensky and Netanyahu were having a very animated discussion at Senator Lindsey Graham's funeral. So I think that in the coming days, more information will come out about whether it is possible for Israel and Ukraine to come closer on this issue. As for the general assessment of what's happening in Washington, for example, the Financial Times described the meeting between Trump and Zelensky as, quote, a sharp turn in Trump's position regarding Ukraine. According to the Financial Times, the closest advisors to the Ukrainian president told the publication that Zelensky always considered personal communication with Trump the most effective way to convince him, and this meeting was no exception. They say that Trump is currently as favorably disposed toward Ukraine as possible, since he followed the advice of his advisors not to communicate with the unwashed Russians for now, particularly with Vladimir Putin. They say the influence of these feral Russians isn't needed. For now, don't even talk to them at all. Try to figure out what's really going on first, and only then you can get in touch by phone with the bold dictator Putin. But if we go back to the sanctions, it's obvious that for Ukraine, the passage of the sanctions bill, at least the first procedural reading, is a real, though intermediate, result. Before the law comes into full effect, there is still the final vote in the Senate, consideration in the House of Representatives, and the president's signature. So the process is far from over. Trump's promise to speed up the licensing of Patriot missile production also remains a political statement of intent for now, and not a direct supply of missiles. And Zelensky's own words about a time frame of 1 to 5 years for setting up mass production show that this does not provide an immediate solution to the interceptor shortage problem. For the United States of America, imposing sanctions against buyers of Russian oil creates, on the one hand, additional leverage over Moscow, but at the same time carries reputational and trade costs in relations with India and China, since these countries are specifically named among the targets of this sanctions bill. For Russia, the very fact of bipartisan support for sanctions in the Senate, with a vote of 86 in favor and 12 against, is a signal of the continuing consensus in the US against easing pressure on Moscow, which, by the way, works against the Kremlin's strategy of waiting things out, which was previously pointed out by Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. He said, well, let's wait. They were clearly stalling for time, and now it's starting to work against them. So even this procedural vote is a signal that Washington is starting to realize that. We tried to put pressure on Ukraine to even make some concessions to Russia. It didn't work because Russia is brazen, Russia is shameless, It keeps pushing further, and even after being promised a super deal, it still refuses. So what now? Let's recall the election campaign and the beginning of Trump's presidency. Marco Rubio said back then that Marco Rubio and the military advisors talked about there being two approaches. So we will put pressure on Ukraine and see what Russia does. If Russia still goes ahead, if they disagree, we'll start pressuring Moscow. As for further scenarios, I think we are moving in three possible directions. The first one, the sanctions bill goes through the remaining procedural stages and comes into force with real pressure on buyers of Russian oil, which, according to some American senators, could actually push Putin into negotiations. More precisely, it won't just be the sanctions pushing him to negotiations, but also his own partners. Second, the process is dragging on. At the stage of the House of Representatives, or because President Trump used his right to lift tariffs at his own discretion, and the effect turns out to be very limited. Third, with regard to Patriot, actual deliveries of interceptors remain hostage to the simultaneous need of the US for the same weapons for the war with Iran, and the promised winter package may, unfortunately, not materialize by the stated deadline, although a solution can be found. These interceptor missiles are also available in European warehouses. Result. On July 29, the US Senate supported in a procedural vote a bill on severe sanctions against Russia and Iran, with tariffs of up to 100% against the largest buyers of Russian energy resources. Volodymyr Zelensky, who was in Washington on the same day, called this the first step towards peace. And at the same time, he stated that the initiative in the war is no longer in the hands of Vladimir Putin. But Russia is preparing a new mobilization and is receiving support from Iran and North Korea. He also appealed to Donald Trump for an emergency winter package of 300 interceptor missiles. Patriot and received a promise to speed up the licensing of their production, with a caveat that the actual launch of mass production will take years. The Financial Times described all this as a sharp turn by Donald Trump toward Ukraine. At the same time, none of the mechanisms being discussed, that is, neither the licenses for Patriot production nor anything else, has yet led to an immediate change, let's put it this way, in the material situation at the front. These are decisions with a delayed effect, the implementation of which depends on subsequent procedural stages in Congress and on the production timelines of American defense companies. Nevertheless, this is still progress, and I think it's impossible to argue with that. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to leave a like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.